There we go. Here we go. All right. So, welcome everybody. It's 12 o'clock and we're going to get started. On behalf of Paula Weinberg and myself, Stacy Fritz, we want to welcome you to Food for Thought. We're going to get started right now, but I do have a question to kick us off, and you are welcome to put this in the chat. Just a way to get, I'm going to call it a little thought jogger, if you will. And the question I have for you is, why was it important for you to show up for this webinar today? And please just go ahead. It can be anything. I just am curious to know what brought you here to the webinar, and we'll just take a look at a couple of them and we'll get started on our content. And if you are not aware of what the content is today, we're going to be talking about alcohol, a really popular subject, right, Paula? We get a lot of, we were just talking before, how many questions we get on alcohol. So again, looking at our participant list, please feel free to throw in the chat, why was it important for you to show up for today's webinar? And I'll give it just a couple of seconds. And if we have nobody who really wants to jump in there, I'm going to tell you why I think it was important for Paula and I to present. And maybe that'll give us a little something to think about, and I'll ask you the question at the end. So as I mentioned, Paula and I do quite a bit of work with folks that are on the cancering journey. And it seems as though whether or not folks are on that journey or not, the topic of alcohol is one that people are very curious about. I think many of us enjoy using alcohol, and the question always is there any healthy version, or how much is too much, and those kinds of questions. So we thought it was really important to kind of highlight it, to really draw the attention to the research and to find out some really big must-knows on the topic, and then allow you to make up your own mind. So with that, again, I'm going to pass the baton to Paula. Paula is our oncology nutritionist. She's our rock star on all things nutrition on the cancering journey, and she's going to share with us that big, deeper dive on alcohol and cancer.
Yeah, so welcome everybody. Welcome back to those of you who are regulars. And today we're going to dive into alcohol and cancer. So alcohol, as Stacy mentioned, can be a really tough and touchy subject for folks, even more so than sugar for some. So as we talk today, check in with yourself on how this topic resonates for you. How difficult is it to think about reducing or eliminating alcohol for the benefit of your health right now? Hopefully it's not a big deal, but I want to honor and make space for the fact that it can be for some people. So if you feel like this topic hits a nerve for you, consider listening to the Chris Beat Cancer podcast interview with author Annie Grace. It's back in January 2020 on the Chris Beat Cancer list, and it's a raw and really honest conversation about Annie Grace's relationship with alcohol, and it may help shed some light on, the role it plays in your life by listening to that podcast if you have any reservations about this topic. So today, here are some of the things we're going to kind of touch on and work through as we unpack this alcohol topic. We're going to start out with statistics and disease. So it's been estimated that approximately 2 billion, that's B, 2 billion people worldwide drink alcohol on a daily basis, and more than 70 million of those have diagnosed alcohol use disorders. Alcohol damages nearly every organ in the human body and is responsible for causing more than 60 different diseases. For obvious reasons, alcohol is causally linked to cancers of the GI tract, all the way from the mouth to the rectum, as well as liver cancer and breast cancer in women. The risk of these cancers is increased even in people who have only 1 drink per day. Even light alcoholic drinking, up to 1 drink per day, increases the risk of cancer of the oral cavity, pharynx, esophagus, and breast. In 2020, it was calculated that just these cancers alone contributed to 6.3 million cases and 3.3 million deaths globally. Alcohol consumption is responsible for 5% of all deaths annually, but of those, 13% are due to cancer. The numbers are so staggering, it's easy to kind of just glaze over and not really even soak that in. But when we stop and think about the millions of moms, dads, brothers, sisters, sons, grandparents, aunts, uncles that make up those staggering statistics, it really hits home. For me, this topic hits really close to home as my oldest heads off to college. Anyone ever indulge in a little too much or too often in college? Well, I know the sobering facts about alcohol and how it affects our bodies, but there's little I can do to protect my own daughter as she heads off into the world and has to come to terms with her own choices when it comes to alcohol and, of course, a million other things. So my daughter, just like everyone else, will have to learn for herself what her limits and values are around drinking. In the words of Robert Louis Stevenson, sooner or later, we all sit down to a banquet of consequences. I'm hoping that our discussion today will help inform better choices and consequences of only the best kind for each of you. I think this topic hits so close to home for so many because alcohol is a modifiable risk factor and one that is very much within our control. In 2012, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IRAC, informally classified ethanol in alcoholic beverages and acetaldehyde, the main metabolite of alcohol that you'll learn more about in a minute, as class 1 carcinogens. Anyone remember that event 10 years ago? Me neither. So was it front page news or the lead story on the evening news? Not that I can recall. Why is alcohol consumption so heavily encouraged and even glorified by all forms of media and within all circles of society? According to TV magazines and magazine ads, alcohol is the way to relax, have fun, be social, and be cool. So why are we as a society continuing to glorify that which makes us ill? These are big questions and obviously ones I don't have answers to, but I invite you to ponder those questions and share your thoughts in the chat if you'd like. So let's take a quick trip through the body to see how alcohol is metabolized. The main component in alcoholic beverages is ethanol. So technically that top purple box there should really be ethanol because that's the main component in alcohol that's being broken down. So the image shows how alcohol is metabolized from ethanol all the way down to fatty acids, carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Pretty benign things. However, both alcohol, the first step, and acetaldehyde, the second step, which is ethanol's primary metabolite, they're both class 1 carcinogens. So you can see how important it is for this pathway to work well. Remember, the class 1 carcinogen is a substance known to cause cancer in humans. So when we drink alcohol, about 20% of ethanol is rapidly absorbed in the stomach and goes out into circulation, which is why it matters whether your stomach is empty or full. And about 80% of alcohol is absorbed further down in the GI tract by the small intestine and then converted to acetaldehyde in the liver. It's important to highlight, however, that while the stomach, small intestine, and liver are the key metabolic sites of alcohol, all the GI tissues from mouth to anus are exposed to alcohol and thus at risk of some level of damage. We're also not all equals when it comes to how we process alcohol, as evidenced by the jokes and references to those who can or cannot handle their liquor. For starters, women metabolize alcohol much slower than men. Several enzymes are responsible for metabolizing ethanol, and their function can be affected by genetic variants or SNPs. Certain populations, like Eastern Asians, are known to carry variants impairing their ability to metabolize ethanol, and it's sometimes referred to as Asian flushing syndrome. When the enzymes that are responsible for breaking down ethanol are not working properly due to those genetic hiccups, the risk of DNA damage and developing alcohol-related cancers is significantly increased. The relationship of alcohol and acetaldehyde to cancer formation is complex and it's still evolving. So scientists are still unpacking why it is that alcohol affects our bodies so tremendously. All the specific mechanisms by which it exerts its carcinogenic effects in the body aren't yet fully known, but the majority of scientific speculation around the mechanisms, a lot of them are pictured here. Inflammation, reactive oxygen species, which damage our DNA and our lipids, altered folate metabolism, increased estrogen, impaired immune and cellular stress. Studies clearly demonstrate that short-term alcohol exposure, commonly found in drinking, kills the cells lining our mouth, pharynx, larynx, and esophagus. So from our oral cavity down to our stomach. So drinking alcohol kills those cells on contact, some of them, which then requires our bodies to regenerate and replace those cells. It's believed that the stem cells deep in the layers of those tissues must then divide more often in order to renew the damaged tissue, which is where the trouble lies. You see, the more times you do something, the more risk for errors. Each time a cell divides, it becomes exposed to potential errors. And the risk only increases with age, since there are other age-related insults to our DNA that compound that problem. Cancers of the oral cavity, pharynx, and larynx, and esophagus are diagnosed about 100 times more frequently in people over 60 than in people under 30. So any external factor that causes cell death, like alcohol, will by definition promote cell division and thus the risk of malignancy. Chronic use of alcohol-based mouthwash is also linked to oral cancer for the same reasons that we just talked about. You know the burn from using the mouthwash. You're not only killing all the bacteria in your mouth, both good and bad, but it also kills the cells of your oral mucosa, and then that prompts that stem cell division we just talked about. Since alcohol in mouthwash is not necessary to prevent and reduce gingivitis and plaque, it's best to choose alcohol-free versions, or better yet, try oil pulling or a water pick for extra deep clean beyond brushing and flossing without disturbing the healthy microbiome of your mouth. So while our focus today is obviously alcohol and cancer, I'm sure you've all experienced the other effects of alcohol, the ones you can actually feel happening, like dehydration, GI upset, headaches, and poor sleep. While alcohol is technically a depressant, it actually has been shown to stimulate the release of cortisol, our stress hormone. And with chronic use, it deregulates this very intricate axis called the HPA axis for short. When this feedback system gets off kilter, it can result in big variations in mood on opposite ends of the spectrum, from deep depression to outward aggression. So you can see how and why drinking is a bit of a catch-22. People do it to self-soothe or relax, or in more extreme cases, to numb out. But the very thing that helps in the moment leaves them feeling really out of sorts when they're not drinking, which sends them back to self-soothe, relax, and numb out. Ethanol and its metabolites also have a really big impact on our microbiome, where 70% of our immune system resides. Drinking alcohol regularly can alter the microbiome by encouraging the growth of bacteria that favor disease. So our microbiome consists of trillions of microbes, and they play a role in everything from the immune system to metabolizing our food, to the creation of vitamins and amino acids for proteins that are needed for daily cellular function. And as you know from previous Food for Thought sessions, our microbiome plays a huge role in our health. One way alcohol and its metabolites can disrupt the microbiome is by creating gut permeability, or leaky gut, which is where the tight junctions of that single layer, the protective mucosal layer lining our small intestines, is disrupted. And then it allows bacteria, large food particles, and endotoxins right into the general circulation. Well, this in turn creates inflammation, both locally and in distant organs. So once alcohol disrupts the integrity of this gut barrier, the balance of the microbiome gets off balance, and the body is quite susceptible to other pathologies like cancer. A glimmer of good news. While alcohol consumption generally damages the microbiome, red wine, however, has been shown to increase the abundance of good bacteria, such as Bifidobacterium and Akkermansia, while inhibiting the growth of bad bacteria like Clostridium, which is linked to IBD and colon cancer. So while some may take that as an invitation to indulge in red wine, which is certainly up to you, I'd urge you to consider using whole foods to feed those good bacteria versus relying on wine. For example, the polyphenols in red wine, which feed the good bacteria, come from grapes. Polyphenols are abundant in so many plant foods like grapes, berries, cherries, dark chocolate, cloves, flax seeds, spices, herbs. We could do a whole talk on just polyphenols. So eating these whole food sources of polyphenols gives you all the benefits without the risks of alcohol. Another concern with regular alcohol consumption is its ability to interfere with digestion absorption of nutrients, such as proteins, vitamins, and minerals. Why do we care so much about proteins? Well, proteins are essential for a wide array of functions in the body. You can see them, a lot of them here. DNA repair, growth and energy, the making of our neurotransmitters and hormones, creation of immune proteins, not to mention the fact that all of the systems of our body are regulated by enzymes, which are made from proteins. So I hope you're starting to see how health or disease is intricately layered in these hundreds of small decisions made to support our bodies or break them down. So hear me out for a second. Envision someone who doesn't eat enough protein or isn't properly digesting or absorbing that protein, which is most people, who doesn't know somebody who's on a PPI or taking other kind of medications for GI upset. And then the protein sources they might eat are processed or feedlot grown animals that are full of hormones and toxins, and then layer upon that some regular alcohol drinking, which again interferes with the protein uptake in the body. So you can see how all these small insults, when repeated day in and day out, can actually very significantly alter the functions of our cells and bodies. It's really quite profound. Alcohol consumption is also associated with vitamin deficiencies, namely folate, B1, B2, B6, vitamins A and C, zinc, calcium, and magnesium. People that chronically drink alcohol often have many nutrient deficiencies. And add to this the fact that many pharmaceuticals also deplete nutrients. You can see another layer of stepping towards disease versus health. So all of these nutrients, proteins, vitamins, minerals, they play critical roles in our cellular function, and which obviously, if we're going to be chronically depleting them in a regular, daily or weekly kind of way, it can have significant fallout for the rest of our tissues and organs. Just to highlight one important example of how nutrients support function, let's look at the process of detoxification. So this is the process by which drugs, alcohol, and toxins leave our body. They enter and then they're transformed into something benign. That's how it's supposed to go. So the liver is an organ obviously very much impacted by the potential damage created by the byproducts of this pathway not working well. As you can see here, phase 1 and phase 2 are both very nutrient dependent. You can see the nutrients listed there on the screen. So if you're drinking alcohol, but not supplying your body with enough of the nutrients that support the detox process, you can see where things just start to get a little wonky. I'd like to take a peek now about how alcohol is linked to breast cancer. As I previously mentioned, alcohol increases the risk of GI and liver cancers, and the connection there is a lot more obvious. But alcohol consumption is an established risk for breast cancer, and the risk is dose dependent. And that means that the cancer risk increases 10% for each drink consumed per day. So alcohol increases not only the risk of developing breast cancer, but also the risk of recurrence. And how does alcohol impact breast health? Again, there are a lot of theories. We're not sure that we know for certain what that might be, but alcohol consumption does increase circulating estrogen and sex hormones in women. It also increases breast density and encourages breast cell growth. Alcohol damages the DNA in the mammary cells, and it also induces chronic inflammation in the fatty tissues of the breast. So alcohol is one of the few breast cancer risk factors that is very much within our control, which, there's so many things that we can't control, and that's certainly one of them. Lastly, a quick note about alcohol and smoking. There's a known synergistic effect of alcohol and tobacco, and it increases the risk of mouth, pharynx, and esophageal cancer tremendously. So the risk of oral cavity and pharynx cancers is about 5 to 10 times higher for heavy smokers than non-smokers, and about 5 times higher for heavy drinkers than non-drinkers. In people that are both heavy smokers and heavy drinkers, the risk of those cancers is about 35 times higher than for people who don't smoke or drink. So all this bad news leaves us wondering maybe what we are supposed to be doing. The American Cancer Society advises that it is best not to drink alcohol. The safest level of drinking is none. People tend to glaze over that part and skip right to the next part, which is that for people who do drink, they should limit themselves to 2 drinks per day for men, and 1 drink per day for women. You might also be wondering then, if I am going to drink, what should I drink? Well, there's not exactly an easy and direct answer to that question, but it gets kind of confusing, and let's dive in for a minute. Beer and wine have an alcohol content that we're looking at 2 things, basically: alcohol content versus acetaldehyde content. And those things can vary. And as you know, they're both class 1 carcinogens. They both cause cancer. So looking at one doesn't necessarily lead us to the next obvious conclusion of that's a safe drink, because it might have low ethanol content or alcohol content, but a high acetaldehyde content. So therein lies the conundrum. So beer and wine have low alcohol content, but have higher acetaldehyde content than high proof spirits like vodka. But vodka has the highest ethanol content and a low acetaldehyde content. So you see where I'm going here. There's not an easy, direct answer. It appears that when you evaluate beverages based on the standard drink picture here, the main exposure of acetaldehyde comes from wine. And those levels can vary a lot depending on the manufacturing process. Fortified or dessert wines like sherry, port, marsala, and Madeira have the highest levels of acetaldehyde. Calvados, a special type of brandy made from apples in France, has a very high level of acetaldehyde, so much so that studies have been shown that drinking Calvados is directly linked to esophageal cancer. In one recent study of 2018, they made a point of stating that to reduce upper GI cancer risk, that doesn't mean all cancer risk, but the contact kind of cancer risk from physically drinking the alcohol, it's important to choose alcoholic beverages with levels of ethanol below the level able to cause the cell death. And remember, that triggers the ripple effect of that increased cellular division. So to do that, how would we do that? I guess dilute beverages to get to those lower levels. For example, one way is to not drink straight shots of spirits like whiskey or vodka or tequila. But we don't exactly have all the answers what those magic levels are that our cells are okay with. Most cells in direct contact with ethanol die after 1 hour exposure to a 5 to 10% ethanol content, or a 15-second exposure to a 30 or 40% ethanol. So that would be most cells. If I reread that with a drink inserted instead of a percentage, it'd be most cells in direct contact with ethanol die after a 1 hour exposure to beer, or after 15-second exposure to a shot of whiskey or vodka. So the studies so far have been done mostly in a lab using human tissue, but they're not studied in actual human beings, which obviously can yield different results. One study tentatively suggests avoiding alcohol concentrations above 10%, which leaves beer, I suppose, or diluted wine or diluted spirits. You can see how real life situations in a human being would vary greatly from a lab study where, whether you're drinking in between whether you're eating along with your beverage, whether you're having water in between sips of your alcoholic beverage, whether you're smoking at the same time. There's so many variables around with human use of alcohol that it's been difficult probably to study. Circling back to that red wine for a second that contains those wonderful polyphenols that are so good for us, should you drink that? Well, I can't answer that question for you, but if you are drinking red wine, look for dry farmed red wine. This has no sugars added, no additives and preservatives. It's organically grown and independently tested for purity. As it turns out, there's a lot of other stuff in your wine glass besides ethanol and acetaldehyde that you should be concerned about. Think about how heavily grapes are sprayed with pesticides. I'm sure you can all picture that cloudy white coating that grapes have when you bring them home from the store. There are also 76 FDA approved additives that could be swirling in your glass besides the alcohol. So if anyone knows of other similar high quality wines, please share it in the chat box. This is the only brand that I know of. A final caveat to drinking alcohol: if you're going to drink, please, please, please consume a high quality whole food diet, rich in vitamins and minerals, to ensure the adequate supplies for detox of your alcohol and optimal function of your healthy cells. Be sure to eat food and/or take high quality supplements if it's appropriate for you to supply and replenish the nutrients used up by the alcohol metabolism. So eat those antioxidants. And obviously I can't tell you what to do regarding drinking alcohol. And even if I did, you'd eventually come back to what feels right for you. There's risk and benefit associated with almost every one of our actions, and alcohol is no different. But remember, the worst lies are the ones we tell ourselves. These are some other resources. You can look at the Annie Grace podcast I mentioned earlier. Mark Hyman does an interesting episode on uric acid that is fascinating. It ties into alcohol, a news clip about moderating alcohol consumption, and then the study that I was referring to about what level of alcohol might be safe for our oral mucosa tissues to not trigger that cell death. That is the study that references that. And you have made it. We are all through.
Whew. Wow, Paula. Geez. Now I'm going to say this tongue in cheek, and I have to put it out there like that. I have children like you do, and my kids would categorize this conversation under the umbrella. I'm talking about me, not you, of being a fun sucker, right? And I'm teasing
Yes,
because we get a bad
absolutely.
rap for telling the truth. And I just want to say that was a big, huge wow. But I'm going to also allow our listeners, if they so choose, you gave us a lot. You gave us a lot to kind of sip on. I'll say it that way. What would you say? And I am asking our listeners, what is one little nugget that you may not have known before that after Paula has given us a really deep dive on the conversation about alcohol? I'd love to know one takeaway because there just really was so many. I'm prepared for no responses because, again, sometimes I think it takes us a little time to process newer information. I think many of us, yeah, let's go ahead and back out of that so they can see us bigger. That's great. I think that many times when we hear a heady or a topic that has more details to it, it takes us a little bit to sit back with it. And I know you and I were talking about this before. The way I compartmentalize this in my brain is the takeaway is that we have three choices, and I'm looking for your verification, Paula. We have the choice, which is the recommendation to not do it at all, not to consume alcohol, and that's for sure is the recommendation. And then we have the other end of the spectrum where we could say, you know what? Thank you for the information. This is my one thing that I enjoy. I enjoy the glass of wine. I've always heard that moderation is the key. And then there's my world where I like to figure out, is there a healthier, is there a compromise? And so what I heard you say in the talk was towards the end, something like a dry farm wine. If you are going to make the decision, make sure that you understand what it is you're consuming. And I am a consumer of that dry farm wine. And if you are interested and you have additional questions, please make sure you go ahead and put them in the chat because I can speak to this. But the reason why Paula and I very much approve that company is because it is low to no sugar. It is dry farmed. And if you don't know what that means that the irrigation is coming from the rain, right? We're not man-made watering those. So hence the grapes tend to be a little smaller, they're more concentrated. We're not using pesticides. They're small batch curated. So we have a little bit more control. And as Paula mentioned, there's the spectrum between male and female on how many glasses that we should have that's in the healthier range. Of course, that red wine comes into play with some of those benefits. But ultimately, it is your decision, as Paula mentioned, and I'm condensing that to say, you have a decision to make, and the decision is one of as it relates to your lifestyle. So what would the two of us like to do? Paula is the researcher and the expert, but I'm always looking and thinking of ways, how could we bridge the conversation from somebody who enjoys alcohol on a regular basis to maybe reducing and then ultimately traveling to a no alcohol because of their diagnosis. So I have a little something. Paula, is it okay with you if I show you how I make my drink?
Yeah,
A
absolutely.
lot of people would call it a mocktail, but I would invite you to not look at it as a mocktail because I happen to think that it tastes like a very good margarita and it's got no alcohol in it. So what I did was I picked up I don't know if you can see that there's a sunflower etched on there. So of course I've got to have the Believe Big etched logo on there because you have to have a pretty cup to drink from, right? That's all about it. Just by drinking from a fancy, prettier cup makes you feel like you're indulging and it's a little bit more luxurious, right? I like the plain seltzer water that's got natural lime. It's called Bubly. You can use a plain seltzer, whatever works for you. I just happen to like this one. So I'm using that. And then, Paula, I'm using something that we both approve of. This is a company called Element, right? And let me show you the package. You can actually buy it on Amazon. I'm not endorsing it. I'm sharing with you one of my go-to strategies. My favorite is the citrus salt. And this is a natural electrolyte. Think of it like if you have children and they heavily consume Gatorade, this is a better, much better choice. Okay, so it's really concentrated, meaning you only need a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pour maybe a half to a quarter of this citrus salt, and then I'm going to add my bubbly, and I'm going to take it all the way up to the top. And because I like both the flavors of lemon and lime, Paula taught us that we should be using organic fruits and vegetables. I've already cut up my organic lemon, and I'm going to circle my glass and squeeze in that lemon, stir it up, and I promise you, if you're somebody who likes a margarita, don't diss it until you try it, because it's absolutely delicious. And as we're headed into the summer months, you just might find that you're not missing the stinging burn of the tequila post margarita, right? No worm in there, right? And no regular salt. So that's one of my go-tos. My second go-to is the one that we just spoke about, which is the dry farm wine on occasion. If you really want to get fancy with that one, you can actually take that dry farm and cut it with some plain seltzer, and then you're getting even half of that alcohol. So those are two big ones for me. I'm going to read in the chat, Paula, and you're welcome to add in any questions, but we had somebody jump in saying alcohol in mouthwash is a concern, was a learning for me. You know what? Me too. It's not like I didn't know that you got that burny feeling from the mouthwash, but it makes sense. And I'll revisit that one as well. Really good one. Anybody else have any questions or comments, or one thing that they are going to take away from today's conversation? Just give it a minute, and Paula, feel free to jump in there and give us do you have any other go-tos besides the one I shared? Something that you...
Yeah, I mean, they'll get a handout that I made on this topic, and it, sort of summarizes a lot of what we talked about today. And it also gives some kind of hacks like you gave, your drink. It gives you a mocktail, and it gives you some other non-alcoholic, refreshing, kind of beverages to kind of try and layer. I think an important part of, like, say, take a mojito, you can kind of make that, and
the muddled mint.
Yes. What makes it so great is the herb part of that. Like if you took the mint out of that, even a real mojito would just not taste good. It would not taste the same. So not skimping on those extra steps of the fruits, the herbs, sort of all those special things that kind of go into alcoholic beverages, and not skipping those steps. And just because you're not having the alcohol part, kind of also is what helps keep it special, and, might make you enjoy that.
And to your point, it's almost like, we've gotten to be a society of overconsumption and excess. And I really wasn't kidding around when I said having that special glass, having that really good fruit, having a seltzer to make you feel like you're having something a little bit more decadent or indulgent, and making, whether it be eating or drinking, an experience. And, again, for people who indulge heavily in alcohol, this is a challenging transition, and I completely appreciate there's zero judgment, but I want to circle back on not only just the presentation of something and being really mindful and intentional about the things that we're consuming, and that includes beverages, but I loved your recommendation. I want to comment on Annie Grace. Annie Grace not only has a podcast, but she also has a book. And if you are listening today and alcohol is your treat, it's your thing that you go to, and you're thinking to yourself, I just heard all of that and I feel a little bit bad, and I would really like to, I would really like to change that behavior, I would recommend taking either a listen on the podcast or getting a hold of Annie Grace's book. It's called This Naked Mind. What I love about her, Paula, is she is somebody who is a non-drinker now. She was self-identified as too much drinking. It had nothing to do with the cancer journey. But what I love about her is this is not a black and white conversation, and she invites you to an experiment. And she has a 30-day experiment where you're just being curious. My favorite character, Ted Lasso, just being curious without judgment. It's not saying you're quitting alcohol. It's not saying you have a problem with alcohol. It's not saying that you have cancer and alcohol. It's none of that. What it is, it's an invitation to understand that alcohol is an acquired, we acquire taste, because back when if she uses the example, do you remember your first sip of alcohol? I do. And I literally could have spit it out. No, I don't think that there's very many people. I don't think it's a leap to say most people who try alcohol for the first time that it was, oh my gosh, this is the most delicious thing in the world. Because alcohol in and of itself really doesn't taste that good. If there's a burning feeling to it in isolation, it's really hot, you know what I mean? And her suggestion is that which you wind up, you can absolutely wind down, and you always have the decision to make a different decision. So again, I offer that up because I have read that book. I have listened to that podcast. I think that was a tremendous recommendation. Annie Grace has got great social media. Check her out. She will change your mind about the drinking game. We have gotten so, she also uses another example. You wouldn't, when you go to a party and someone says, can I get you a cocktail? And if you respond, no, thank you, there's an immediate feeling that there's a judgment, right? And then when's the next thing you heard? You sure I can't get you a drink? Why aren't you drinking? You know what I mean? The questions go on and on and on. But would you say the same thing if when we're talking about cocaine or heroin? You would never do that. And the conversation is the same. It's a drug. So just my little 2 cents worth. Again, I think as we head into the summertime months, it's hard. It's hard for many, but consider the transition, consider the not doing it, and then consider being a little more curious and finding other resources. We've got somebody, Kate jumped in there, said, great tip about the LMNT Margarita. I think so too. And I'm sure that you're going to try it again. I didn't endorse this, but wink, wink, nudge, nudge is a great one for kids and for adults. Paula, do you like the taste of this?
I haven't had that one. There's another one called Ultima that's also good, that my kids use.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely a clean brand. So I haven't tried that.
We're knocking out 2 problems. We got rid of the sugar and we're talking about getting rid of the alcohol, which I love. She also, she says, I love my alcohol-free mojito, just as Paula said earlier, with a lot of fresh mint from my garden, and we're getting some health benefits there. So I think that's great. I'm going to give it 30 seconds more and ask if there's any other questions, comments, learning nuggets that you want to talk about, and I'll just guide us into the exit. As always, you will have the replay link. You will have some of our recommendations. I'll put the recipe in there. I'll put Paula's recommendation for the dry farm wine link in there as well. And Paula, as she mentioned, did a beautiful alcohol handout. So we can wear our hats, Paula and me, as the fun sucker, as my kids would call us. And so you can just you can put it on the refrigerator and just remind yourself. And when you take it off, then you can be a fun factor. Anyway, it was our pleasure to be with you today. Please reach out, Stacy at believebig.org. And that's Stacy with no E, STACY. Feel free to reach out, at any time. I'll answer any questions, put you in contact with Paula if you need a little more help, a little more hand holding. She does a great job, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well. We have 2 questions before we go. Let's see. Oh, Kate, I just shared with you. It will be a send out of the recording link. It'll come in an email. Because you registered for this webinar, you will get that automatically. And brings me to my next point. If you go to the believebig.org site and you go under nutrition resources, all of the past webinars that Paula and I have had the pleasure to do together are right there. All right. So Lauren said, I didn't know about dry farm wines, and I basically don't drink. I will keep a bottle of this on hand for 3 or 4 times a year that I do have an aperitif-sized glass of wine. I will add that I stopped drinking in 2016 after my first breast cancer. Good for you. I was exercising and had good nutrition. 2.5 years later, I had a new diagnosis, the second breast cancer. Okay, here's the thing. I so appreciate that, Lauren. And I'm going to piggyback off of what Paula said. There are things in our life that we can actively raise our hand to say yes or no to. And then there's some things that we don't have that much control over. I want to encourage you, inspire you, celebrate you for all the things that you are doing. And if you need additional help in this category, as I mentioned, Stacy at believebig.org, and I will send you right to Paula or another resource that might be helpful for this. In the meantime, consider, again, diving a little deeper into that Annie Grace podcast and learn a little bit more about all the health benefits there of not drinking, and keep on rocking it. I know you can do it. And I thank you so much for sharing that story. Anybody else have any other comments? Just so you know, this is my favorite part. I love all of it, but my favorite part's hearing from you all. I think when we can pull together a community of folks that are really working towards a healthier lifestyle, just making these little changes, that really inspires both of us. So I thank you for sharing any and all of it. I think it's terrific. So look for that replay link, look for the handout, reach out to me if you need anything. I'll send you right to Paula if you need that as well. And we will put in the email when the time will be and the date will be for our next one. And I hope that sounds like a plan. We love you guys and we're wishing you the best. Have a wonderful day and see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.